interrupt this performance of the Chicago Opera Hour with this bulletin from the WPOD Newswire. Dateline, Chicago. Billibob Baddins, one-time dwarf warrior of the Griffinos Highlands, now private detective of Chicago, Illinois, is hired by socialite Julia Lessinger to look into the death of gangster Pretty Boy DeMaio, her boyfriend and right-hand man to Alphonse Scarface Capone. Billy's investigation begins at Sal's Diner, where DeMaio was killed. His job becomes increasingly difficult when two imposing gentlemen also arrive to inspect the crime scene. A hunch leads him to the district attorney's office, but only creates more confusion as Billy discovers a desk drawer in the courthouse sealed with a low-level spell. And now you know the story so far. We return you to our regularly scheduled programming here on WPOD Chicago.
Chapter 3. Getting on My Bad Side. Chicago has gone unsung for its hidden treasures for as long as I've known her. When it comes to culture, sports, and just about everything else, people drone on and on about New York. Oh, if you want theater, go to New York. If you want the latest fashion, go to New York. If you want to see a real ball team, go see the Brooklyn Dodgers in where? New York. Yeah, the Dodgers and the Yankees can go sit in my hat. They pretend to be a team wrapped around one or two real players. Don't get me started. When dinks continue to babble on and on about how great New York is, Chicago gets labeled as a den of crime and corruption. They tell us that New York, compared to a second-rate shire like Chicago, is a realm fit for kings, queens, and nobility, where the streets are paved with gold, everyone thrusts out a helping hand, and doors of opportunity and prosperity open wide around every corner. Let me tell you something about New York. The Big Apple ain't that sweet. More like it's rotten to the core. The only gold on the street is where bums relieve themselves. That helping hand is pointing the barrel of a Roscoe between your peepers. And those doors of opportunity are double padlocked with bars over the windows. I got all this after one visit, and that was one too many. So you can keep New York. My heart belongs to Chicago. And when it comes to restaurants, my heart, and on the exceptional nights, my heartburn, belong to Mix. That's where I now found myself after divvying up my day between a crime scene, the Chicago courthouse, and my former haunt, the old public library on Washington Street. Going through past newspapers to see if anything, a string of raids, an arrest, anything, could clue me in on DeMaio playing footsie with the feds. I wish I could say the afternoon had yielded up plenty of leads, but hell, that would have been too easy. Frustrated was the best word to describe me at this point, and the only cure was mixed chili special. 30 years ago, Mickey Nowinski's dad came to America with a name that was tough as nails to pronounce and a demeanor to match. Seeing how things were in New York, what with the boats dumping half of Europe on America's shores, the jobs becoming as scarce as a decent flop, and street gangs cropping up like Dunaheim ogreweed, he and the family headed out west, eventually settling on Chicago because the cold winters reminded them of home. As Nowinski Sr. worked his way up from dishwasher to cook, those cold winters inspired him to concoct an incredible delicacy that eventually made him owner of his own place. Mickey Jr. now ran the joint his dad started, a short-order diner boasting the best chili in town. Well, I say boast, but it's not a boast so much as it is a promise. More like a pledge of honor that Mix meets every day. While the diner's never short on seats, Mix delivery boys keep in great shape running his chili from place to place. Whether it's the big shots at the financial hub, the politicians of City Hall, the guys down at the docks unloading barges, or those construction daredevils high above the sidewalks on an I-beam and a prayer, everyone agrees on where to find the best chili in town. Sooner or later, everybody goes to Mix. Back in the here and now, Mick's place ain't a far cry from his dad's. The backdrop's a little noisier, though. The usual ting-ting-ting of the tiny brass bell above the door was drowned out by a less gentle ha-hooga from a flivver outside, causing a few heads to turn my way as I walked through the door. Which brings me to another pet peeve. Humans, either from Acryonis or right here, enjoy this great wizard's illusion of discretion whenever they happen across an unusual-looking person, or dwarf. While they whisper to one another or try not to stare, the reality is that their voices carry in the wind like a battle cry, and their eyes bore through you like a fire blade through butter. My ability to pick up their comments has nothing to do with dwarves possessing some sort of exceptional hearing or anything like that. As a matter of fact, we've got a hearing range similar to that of humans. But God forbid humans should have anything in common with a dwarf. At least that's the impression I get. When people notice a dwarf like me walking to a place like Mick's, the resulting lull in their conversation reminds me of when me and the boys would open one of those thick tavern doors in a human-heavy village. Everyone shuts up for a moment, then goes back to their routine. Or one of those Western shoot-'em-up movies where the bad guy in the black hat, who knows he's being talked about, pats his pearl-handled six-shooter and moseys on up to the bar, relishing being talked about. The only relish I like is the kind of my dog out at Wrigley Field. I spend my life building up a thick exterior, but it doesn't make dealing with whispers and snickers any easier. The guy who works as my shield against these naysayers is my pal Mickey, who's capable of shooting customers operating under that discretion spell a crossbow bolt of a look, a good, hard Polish stare that could stop a blue dragon dead in its tracks. It usually works on the average Joe and Josephine, but tonight there was a table of dinks in custom-cut pinstripes that continued to make jokes at my expense. I could hear them. They knew it. Sure enough, this was beginning to look like one of those westerns, with me being the good guy walking into the saloon, gearing up to introduce these outlaws to my girl Beatrice, who remained snug against my left breast in her holster. You see, that was always my problem with those moving picture cowboys. They were showing everyone where they were packing heat.
Hey there, Billy. How you doing?
Mick hailed cheerfully as he poured out a bowl of the special for the guy next to me. God bless this crazy Polak. First, he had fixed a seat at the end of his bar, deliberately higher than the others, especially for me. Then there was that winner of a smile and his battle-horn bellow of a greeting, an obvious one-fingered salute to those mooks sitting in the booth behind me. Now he presented me a bowl of the batting-sized chili special, while the customer next to me now eyed his own bowl, wondering why the short guy hopping up into the higher stool was getting an extra ladleful of Mick's best. Yeah, he's looking at his own bowl. Now mine. He's thinking about letting it go. Now he's thinking about how good this chili is. Takes another spoonful while staring at my own. He's reconsidering. Give it a moment. 3, 2, 1. Excuse me, sir? The sap waved to grab Mick's attention. I stifled a good, hearty laugh. I could tell he wasn't a regular. He called Mick sir, and that meant it was time for the dinner entertainment. Mick does love a comedy routine for the Saturday night crowd, and I was always the headliner at his vaudeville review. Why is he getting a bigger order of the special? The sap protested.
Well, sir,
Mick said sharply, giving his sir an extra sting.
Being as we are a family-run place, I'd like to know who I'm talking to.
Any paler, and this guy could have been mistaken for a swamp wraith. My name's Kevin.
Kevin.
Mick nodded, cleaning his hands with a towel and slinging it over his shoulder.
You gotta understand a couple things here, Kevin. First, this is my place and I can do whatever I want. That's why the name of the place is Mick's, not Kevin's.
He turned to the counter behind him for a moment, and then placed 4 fresh green jalapeno peppers in front of me, evenly spaced and lined up as if they were fine slivers of Dunhamian jade displayed before me for approval. I gave him a very subtle nod.
Second, this here is Mr. Billy Baddins. Don't let his height fool you. He's got a big appetite.
That was my cue to pick up one of the peppers and pop it in my mouth, stem and all. While a 4'1" redhead with a scraggly beard and a 30-something-inch waist, dressed in a navy pinstripe suit, hardly strikes fear in the hearts of mortal men, the ability to polish off a couple of raw jalapenos tends to give people a moment's pause, especially if they don't see you sweat. Each pepper's crunch could be heard clearly by this guy at the bar and the handful of customers enjoying their chili, sandwiches, and sodas. Even those orcs cracking their jokes on me earlier paused for a second as I held pepper number 3 between my pudgy fingers and lifted it to the light, savoring its color and firmness with the appreciation of a true connoisseur, before plunging it into the murky abyss of a dwarf's stomach. I took a solid bite out of the last pepper, the resulting crunch causing the little nipper having dinner with his mom and dad to whisper, "Wow." I smiled and polished it off in the second bite. Still no trace of sweat forming on my brow, not even when I took a sip of the piping hot coffee Mick served as a chaser. "Nice appetizer, Mick," I coolly remarked, dabbing at the edges of my mouth in a true Proroian manner. No sigh of relief, no intense flush on my face, apart from the brilliant red in my beard. No troll's belch. That would come later. "I think I'll take that chili now," I purred like a saber-toothed mountain cat to the Black Hills. "You got any hot sauce I can put on it?"
For you, pal? Sure.
To desecrate Mick's chili would normally be considered sacrilegious, but this was just part of the show. Every chili eater in the joint knew that another drop of Tabasco would bring down the wrath of El Honor Dorea temple gods. While Mick searched for his bottle of hot sauce, I leaned in toward Kevin, his own special growing colder and colder, while he stared at me like I was a freak of nature. I knew my breath had to reek of jalapenos, a nice touch that always made my next line a fun way to end this bit of dinner theater. "If I were you, bub, I would scoot down a few chairs. Fresh vegetables give me gas like you wouldn't believe." Had he moved any faster, I think the barstool cover would have gone with him. His change on the counter was still settling with a jingle before the door slammed shut, the bell above the door pealing wildly as if trying to get the last word in this scene. Mick roared with laughter as he plunked down the tiny bottle of Tabasco and a tall glass of water with a fresh slice of lemon floating between clumps of crushed ice.
"Goddamn, Billy, I never get tired of doing that,"
he said gleefully between gasps. "Just count yourself lucky that I've got this cast iron stomach," I scoffed while shaking the still capped hot sauce over my dinner. Preserving the illusion, you know. I took another look at the crowd. A quiet Saturday night. Not normal for Mick's place. I don't know if it was a twinge of guilt I felt, or if the jalapenos weren't laying right, but I looked up at my friend apprehensively. "Look, Mick, you didn't think that was too much. I don't want to start.
Now, don't you get in a sweat, Baddins,"
Mick scolded, scooping up the poor sap's change and ringing up the sale.
"A dingleberry like that coming into my place telling me how to run things? I don't appreciate that. If I want to make your Saturday chili special, a little extra special, then that's my call, not Kevin's. Don't get in a lather, Billy. Just eat your dinner."
If you're wondering why I'm getting this special treatment from Mick, it's got a lot to do with being a dwarf. Mick was telling me one day over a glass of some particularly cheap Canadian booze that his whole family was running this uphill race simply because they were of Polish descent, as those discreet humans would put it. Now, I can understand the animosity toward me, to an extent. I'm a dwarf, 4 foot tall, redhead, a walking mass of pleasant portliness. I'm different, sure. I admit that. But to slight a guy, let alone an entire family, for having a last name that sounds like a high elder during a sneezing fit? You're kidding me, right? I could care less about that stuff, so long as you hold a steady bow, have a good eye for distance, and you're drawing a bead on the mook shooting at me. Guess that's why Mick and I hit it off. A Pollock and a Scrappy, drunk off bootleg whiskey, and having a good laugh at how much we had in common. When I was first starting out as a gumshoe back in 28, my clients were not as reputable as Miss Julia Lessinger. Many of those first clients were down in their luck, what Miranda would call good heart cases. The kind that you do because bad things are happening to good people, and you get paid when you get paid. Yeah, I had to keep the Waldorf routine polished and ready at a moment's notice. Well, Mick was one of those good heart cases. Back then, he was having a problem with break-ins. Capone's boys were going easy on him concerning protection money, as that was now considered old hat for the organization. The real money was in running numbers, bootlegging, and the old reliable income that was a moneymaker across Acryonis, too. Prostitution. The talk on the street was that Capone ran things differently, although a couple of the generals continued to take protection payment simply out of habit. Mick wasn't being pressured into paying protection money, yet. And the evidence I came across didn't appear like a sales pitch for Capone Insurance. No, these break-ins were way too subtle. It smacked of an inside job. I did a bit of asking around, watched Mick's place, and eventually found out it was one of his waitresses who had gotten herself into trouble with some slick-talking mook. Instead of taking it to the cops or to Capone, we all had a sit-down. It turned out that this waitress, a sweet girl named Annabelle, was in a maternal way unexpectedly, and it looked like the boyfriend was going to be anything but helpful. This guy actually had Annabelle believing it was solely her fault that she had a loaf in the hearth. Now, you would think that the boss she was stealing from would consider kicking her into the streets, heavy with child or not. Not the Nowinski clan. Mick took her into his own home. Where the Nowinskis lived was hardly a castle estate, but there was a guest room open for visiting relatives. His family did all but adopt Annabelle and her newborn baby. She still works at Mick's as a waitress, while Mick's wife, Gladys, watches the kid. After that good heart case, Mick and I became friends. Good friends, although I still can't release all the spirits from my keep. Not yet. For now, all they know is that I'm a guy who faced some hardships on account of my height. When the time is right, I'll let them know about Acryonis, the portal, and all the rest. Regardless of how much they come to know, I can always count on them being there, because their hearts are always open to me. They're my new family in this new realm. And with my new family constantly trying to hook me up with their numerous friends and relatives, I'll never have a lonely night in my life. And lately, Mick has been getting sneakier.
Why don't you come by the place Tuesday night, Billy?
He was smiling warmly. Too warmly.
Gladys is fixing your favorite bratwurst recipe.
The spoon stopped before entering my mouth. I raised a skeptical eyebrow. Who is it this time, Mick? He paused in wiping down the counter, and then, without looking me in the eye, he replied with one breath.
Her name's Bertha. She's my third cousin.
For the druids of Haddismill. I took a bite of chili, savoring its flavor while I took in my friend's imploring eyes. My meal would probably taste better if I could duck all the matchmakers around me. Was your family the only family on the boat from Poland? You sure you ain't Italian?
So I got a big family, so shoot me.
Mickey shrugged as he began stacking a few of the empty plates at the opposite end of the bar.
You'll like her. She's a redhead, too.
So that makes her, what, Irish-Polish? I held up a chubby finger, trying to drive the point home as I had tried time and again in the past. Mick, you know I don't want to disappoint you. I mean, come on. Why are you wanting to hook me up with someone in your family?
She's a nice girl, Billy. You're a nice guy. You'll like her.
It doesn't take a detective to know the words, "you'll like her," can be the most dangerous words used when setting up a blind date. You don't know me that well, Mick, I joked. All I'm going to do is go out with her once and break her heart.
Or trip her up when you open the door for her.
The voice came from behind me. In the chrome of the napkin dispenser, I caught a blurred reflection of those mooks sniggering in their booth, like a bunch of goblins cornering a litter of kittens. Instead of cutting the offenders to the quick with his signature death stare, Mick just finished stacking the plates in front of him and carried them over to the sink, where he started running the hot water. I shook my head, returning to my meal. You'll let anyone eat here, won't you?
Well, Billy,
Mick replied quietly.
Sometimes you have to let the customers get in the last word, especially when they're part of the working class.
That was all I needed to know. These brainless ogres behind me were Capone's ogres. The fine-cut suits, plus the dim expressions that implied these mooks could change their socks easier than their minds, should have been a giveaway. But one thing you learn as a detective is never to take things at face value. This was one of those times where my gut instincts had been right.
I see. You give this Polak a break.
The ogre grunted.
Data's cousin. She's only distantly related. Couldn't be as butt ugly as him.
All right. Nobody was allowed to call Mick a Polak, aside from me. And taking a swing at my friend's family, the family I considered to be my family? Not smart. Swing and a miss. Strike one. I watched the formless image move closer in the napkin holder, until he was looming over me like a gargoyle extending from a parapet of a cathedral. His expensive cologne and cheap Chesterfield he was smoking completely overpowered the sweet bouquet of Mick's work. Wherever he was in the organization, He was nothing more than a foot soldier. Still, he could make my life uncomfortable if he wanted to.
Besides, short stuff here ain't beating the birds away, are ya?
He chuckled, taking a long drag from his cigarette. He blew smoke in my face. I was okay with that. Then he put his cigarette out in my chili. Did I not mention Mickey Nowinski's chili is that good? Strike two.
Then again, I don't know. I could be wrong.
Mr. Funnyman motioned to Annabelle, who was trying really hard to become invisible in taking care of her customers.
What do you think, sister? Could you love a Mick leprechaun with a mug like this?
Strike three. One great thing about being 4'1" is that whenever you have a creep trying to get your goat, he has to bend down to look you in the eye. It throws him off balance, which makes hitting his face with the back of your elbow so very easy. Sure enough, Funnyman toppled back, hands covering his nose and howling like a wounded pack beast. Neither he nor his sidekicks had expected me to make a move, but he was 2-0 at the plate before the leprechaun crack. If he wanted to walk, he needed to be nicer. I love Mick's Diner for some of the simple touches, like his plates and bowls. They're so thick and heavy that when Annabelle is having that occasional day of clumsiness, she can drop 10 of these plates and only 2 or 3 will chip or break. They are solid, American-made. In the hands of a dwarf with military training, they become weapons. The second ogre was reaching for his piece, but not before I got a firm hold of the wide-rimmed soup bowl in front of me. As I did, I caught a glimpse of the bent Chesterfield sticking out of what was, at one time, very good chili. What I was about to do would normally be considered a horrific waste. But I had my back against the counter, and besides, the chili was ruined anyway. I'd rather have Mick's hard work go out in a blaze of glory than on account of some asshole's cigarette. I gave that bowl a good hurl. By the time the second ogre's piece saw daylight, the bowl, now discus, nailed him square in the bridge of his nose. I got a real satisfaction in hearing the pop of bone and cartilage when it hit him. The girlish squeal he let out was an added bonus. On striking its intended target, the remainder of my still-hot-from-the-kettle dinner went straight into the face of the third thug. Funnyman was attempting to get back on his loafers, but a hard spin on my bar stool brought my Buster Browns around to clock my wisecracking buddy in the jaw and send him back to the floor in the throw rug position. The third guy, kinda skinny for a gangster, but I guess it takes all kinds, had just cleared the bits of chili from his eyes, the red in them matching the burn on his skin. I doubt if he could see clearly through his watering peepers, but I'm sure he could at least make out the blob that was his buddy, all bloody nose and lack of balance, falling on top of him. When I heard the sound of heaters hitting the floor, I brought Beatrice out to play. She was looking good after the tender loving care I had bestowed on her after the visit from Miss Lessinger. It was a sure bet that asking questions about Big Al's business would invite some socially challenged types, so I had made sure Beatrice was ready for any one-night stands. Right now, her barrel was resting between Funnyman's nose and his cheek, her hammer pulling back with a that rang through Mick's place like a body collector's bell in the eerie quiet of a village struck by plague. The rest of Mick's patrons hit the dirt, the mother shielding her young son from any stray bullets. But I wasn't worried about bystanders. These dinks were smart in one respect. If they caused any problems in their boss's territory, they wouldn't be seen around the neighborhood anymore. Hell, as pissed as Capone would get, it would be a stroke of luck if their own mothers took credit for them. I looked up at the other stooges in their booth, both frozen in their clumsy stances. They looked really uncomfortable. I liked that. With the second ogre now sporting a crooked nose and a blood and chili-stained pinstripe suit, and awkwardly leaning against his scrawny, red-faced sidekick, it could have been a laugh riot for everyone at Mick's. But Beatrice had raised the tension just a hair. Maybe more like a hair trigger. My eyes darted from face to face, a nudge from my head motioning them to slide slug-like out of their cozy booth. Boys, 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 I scolded, pressing Beatrice a little harder against the ringleader's face. He was still disoriented from my kick, and probably also trying to work through his thick skull how a Scrappy had taken him down in a mostly fair tavern brawl. This could have been a friendly Saturday night at Mick's, but you had to go and spoil it for everyone. Now, if memory serves me right, I've heard your boss state pretty proudly that he's a simple businessman with his interest towards the people. I've also heard him deny that the violence in this city— on the word violence, I pushed Funny Man closer to the floor, with Beatrice just aching to give him a kiss— doesn't come from him or any of his associates. Now, when I arrange a little chat with the press about how the local mob muscle is getting out of hand, how well do you think that will set with Mr. Capone?
Capone?
The scrawny one scoffed.
You think we work for that greasy, jelly-bellied Dago?
Shut up, Eddie.
Barked Funny Man, his speech impaired somewhat by his face being pressed into Mick's floor.
Don't say nothing no more until I tell you, okay?
These ogres didn't work for Capone, and they were causing problems in his territory? Either these boys were particularly stupid, terribly lost, or had a good reason being in this part of town. All right then, educate me. Who you mooks representing? I felt Funny Man, who was still getting cozy with Beatrice, quietly shake his head at his two dimwits, the looks on their faces silently begging him for an order. Why, oh why did they have to play it the hard way? I kept the big guy pinned to the floor with a knee to the back of his neck as I drew a bead on Scarecrow, who had made it through this scuffle so far with only a slight burn and a cleaning bill. Beatrice fired off a shot, knocking his fine felt chapeau off his elongated melon and knocking it several feet behind him. As Scarecrow fumbled for his piece, Bloody Nose reeled for a moment and gripped the edges of the booth, his piece still underneath the table where he had dropped it. Meanwhile, my own heater was already back kissing Funny Man's cheek. I knew the barrel was still warm from the shot, reminding him I was worse than serious. I was downright nuts.
Let me whack this prick, Lou. He took a shot at me.
Scarecrow shouted, looking a little unhinged by my target practice. I let out a chortle. Who said I was aiming for your noggin, Scarecrow? He followed my glance to the left of his shiny brown leather shoes, where there lay a tiny arrangement of quail feathers, accented with a single bright yellow feather. Scarecrow quickly looked behind him to where his hat was still rolling unevenly, and then looked back to the adornment by his shoe. A terrific hat decoration, just begging to be a sharpshooter's target. Now you know how good a shot I am. Beatrice's hammer pulled back once more as a muscle under my left eye twitched lightly. I can promise you that with your boy here, I won't miss. We're going to try this again, boys. Who you packing heat for? Neither Bloody Nose nor Scarecrow spoke up. They were being good little lapdogs. But Lou here apparently figured if he didn't speak up at this point, Beatrice would.
Moran.
And here I thought I was going to have to waste another bullet, or 3, tonight. Lou was a lot smarter than he was funny.
We're working for Bugs and Moran.
Beatrice doesn't usually make an appearance without hurting somebody. It has to be one serious exception to the rule to make her back down, and hearing that name in Capone's territory served as an exceptional exception. Beatrice's hammer slowly returned to a safe position as I stepped away from Lou, still keeping my girl in my grip in case any of them felt a sudden urge of idiotic bravery. To say that George Bugs Moran and Alphonse Scarface Capone didn't care for one another would be like saying a cleric of the Rushiel Valley would get religious every now and then. Moran hated Capone. Capone hated Moran. They bickered so intensely that if they lived under the same roof, they would have been legally married by the justice of the peace. The only difference is that when married couples bickered, it usually involved a rolling pin, a few flatware projectiles, and maybe the odd pot or pan. When this Irish-Italian couple argued, it involved Tommy guns and switchblades. Moran and his boys had been keeping clear of Chicago since Valentine's Day, and now these dinks were in mix, kicking up a fuss. This couldn't be anything good. All right, boys, I nodded. I know I don't want any trouble, and you don't want to be dead. So why don't we put our toys away and go back to our respective shires? I don't think either Capone or Moran would take too kindly to you orcs causing trouble in a protected establishment. Yeah, I know I just said Mick's place wasn't officially a protected establishment. But Capone had a softer side for the working class who had come up from nothing and built up a legacy. Mick's legacy was the chili special. Capone's favorite indulgence, apparently, apart from the Italian food he enjoyed in Chicago's Little Italy. Either way, if something went down with Mick, Moran would sure feel a bit of payback in the morning. Lou straightened his tie and removed the blood from the corner of his mouth. Scarecrow, who Lou was calling Eddie, resheathed his boom dagger, and Bloody Nose, nameless as well as brainless so far, keeping his eye on me for as long as he could, returned to the booth and reached under the table for his own gun. While slipping it back into his shoulder holster, Bloody Nose flipped his once white handkerchief to a clean side. The hanky was now a deep crimson, and I could only smile at the excuses he would give Moran about what happened. I slipped Beatrice back inside my jacket, giving Moran's muscle the grin of a vermouth after it devours a small hunting party. Good boys. Now, how about you three call it a night? Hell, I'll even pick up your bill. Lou instinctively took a couple steps back as I passed him on the way back to the bar and hopped up on my bar stool without so much as a second glance. If we part on good terms, Capone and Moran won't know about this. So go home and make sure your doc takes a look at Bloody Nose. I'd hate to have an infection on my conscience. Yeah, I was enjoying this. I didn't think it could get any better until Lou the leader leaned in, looking as if he were going to rip my head off and stuff it in his coat pocket.
Anything else, Leprechaun?
I nodded, not looking at him. Yeah, that reminds me. I grabbed his necktie and yanked him down to the bar, his chin slamming hard against its cool surface. I could hear Mick utter a sympathetic groan as Lou's teeth slammed hard against each other in his mouth. I am not a leprechaun. I am not an elf, and I definitely ain't no munchkin. I am a Highlands dwarf. You hear me? A dwarf. D-W-A-R-F. Confuse me with anything else, and I will take great pleasure in teaching you the differences between dwarves, elves, and leprechauns. I leaned in closer and whispered, and I'll let you in on one difference right now. Dwarves love battle axes. I could hear his hands underneath the bar, trying to come up and rip the necktie out of my hand. Then I felt Lou grab my coat. Guess he thought we were in round 2. Bad guess. I gave the necktie a bit of slack, only to yank again, bringing his square jaw back to the bar. He let me go after that. We understand each other?
Yeah.
He grunted, struggling against my hold on his necktie. A few drops of blood dribbled out from between his gnashing teeth. Yep, he bit through his tongue.
I got you, dwarf.
Good. Releasing the tie, I motioned to Mick, who already had a fresh bowl of the special waiting for me. Now beat it. Your stink is killing the scent of my chili. For a long minute, no one moved. Lou was holding all the cards in this game. I could tell the bleeding in his mouth was giving him a huge complex. But if Moran wanted him in Capone's territory, he probably wanted him to stay out of trouble. A death like mine in an establishment like Mick's would have been a bushelful of it.
Let's go, boys,
he muttered. Mick watched wide-eyed as the rumpled, wrinkled pinstripes left his place. The family quickly ripped out a few bills, threw them on the table, and quickly hurried out, their little boy staring wide-eyed at me. That left only the young couple at a table in the corner, staring at me for a moment before nervously returning to their root beer float and chit-chat. Annabelle frowned at the mess I had made with my chili discus, but she was soon smiling as she tidied up the family's table. In his haste, the father had tipped her 50% of the bill. Seemed like she and her kid were going to have a good weekend. I adjusted my own hat and took a deep breath to clear my noggin as Mick presented me with a new bowl of chili. While I finally started to enjoy my dinner, he wiped the old chili and Lou's blood off the bar, giving a high-pitched whistle and shaking his head as he did so.
I tell you what, Billy, you either lead a charmed life or you have a death wish.
How so, Mick? His voice dropped to a sharp whisper.
Oh, come off it, Billy. You know why. Those were Bugs Moran's boys.
When the entrance bell jingled again, I thought Mick was going to jump out of his Polish-American skin. It was just his son, Joshua. What's the matter, Pop? Coming in from his last delivery of the day. He must have had a hot date lined up for tonight, if the anxiousness in his eyes was anything to go by. Ah, to be 60 and young again. After heaving a sigh of relief, Mick continued whispering away, as if not to tempt the fates and have Moran's boys return for another inning, although they had just struck out in the bottom of the ninth and wouldn't risk another beating over Mick's name-dropping. Superstitious Pollock, but I love him like a brother.
Good Lord, Billy, those are the kind of people you thank God every morning you don't know. If you do know them, you make sure to stay on their good side through the day so you can make it through the day.
I shot him a grin. Now, Mick, I know those boys could have made me disappear in an unforgettable kind of way, but this is where you have to look at the big picture. Last month, Valentine's Day. You remember that little party Capone threw?
Billy, come on!
Mick was sweating, and it had nothing to do with how hard he was working. If I didn't calm him down, the poor guy was going to have a heart attack.
You gotta watch what you...
Hey, you two. Romeo and Juliet. For a minute there, I thought I had evoked the powers of a Medusa. Those poor kids didn't move for so long that I was expecting to find the telltale veins of marble slowly appearing in their paling skin. With faces you would only find in a statue garden, they silently gave me a no, with a simultaneous shaking of their heads. There you go, some free detective work. So unless you are working with Moran, it is just you, me, and the star-crossed lovers over there. He just laughed, shaking his head ruefully as I returned to the bouquet of spicy flavors in the bowl before me. Mick. Old Bugs knows that Capone is pissed all over this town like a possessive hunting hound. He's claimed his territory, and he intends to keep it. He lifted a cautionary finger.
So what's your point, Billy? If I were anyone else, you'd be out of here without a second thought. I don't want trouble in my place.
And you're not going to get any, my friend. I smiled confidently, giving his shoulder a friendly nudge. I don't start trouble that I can't finish. You know that. You and your customers were safe tonight.
I knew they were, Billy,
Mick replied, shaking his head in frustration.
but that's not what I mean. What I mean is, Capone leaves me alone so long as he likes my chili. But if Moran's boys mention what happened...
If Moran wanted to let Capone know he was back in his territory, or even if he wanted this to be a warning by starting up some trouble, you think those ogres would have laid low for so long? You're going to tell me they were waiting for some half-pint yahoo like me to walk in here so they could announce that Moran's back in town. It took a bullet to get them to spill the beans on their employer.
You mean they were here in secret?
Mick mused out loud. It's always fun watching him play detective. I'd sung for my supper already, twice, and it was time I got a little entertainment with my meal. Whenever Mick assumes the role of my unofficial assistant in my casework, I can't help but smile.
Then Moran will want him to stay that way.
Mick added, continuing his train of thought.
Best way to blow a secret is to blow someone away, right? If they were made, that means Capone would know Moran is in town, making two bosses mad at him.
I'll make a gumshoe of you yet, Mick. I winked, savoring another spoonful of chili.
Doesn't take a gumshoe to read the papers, Billy.
He replied with a chuckle, but I could see the gears starting to turn.
That ain't like Moran, being all secret-like.
Now he was really getting caught up in it. This is usually the point where I have to remind him that I'm the detective and he's the master of the chili.
So what do you think Moran is up to? Checking to see if the coast is clear?
I shrugged. Well, now, if I knew that, Mick, I wouldn't be that busy of a detective, now would I? Right now, I need to focus on only one problem at a time. But then I paused in my dinner. I don't know why it suddenly hit me on this particular spoonful, but then I popped the chili in my mouth and nodded. There is a chance, and I'm thinking it's a pretty big one. It might have something to do with my latest case. I sighed, producing a larger than usual amount of greenbacks from my wallet.
Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Who's your latest case? Joseph Rockefeller?
Now you know I can't go into that. I chided him as I paid for the dinner and the evening's excitement with a couple of Hamiltons. I had managed to get to the bank just in time before it closed for the weekend to deposit the down payment for Miss Lissinger and break one of her C-notes down to some smaller bills. Still, walking around with a few more Lincolns and Hamiltons than usual was a touch unsettling. I must have forgotten for a moment just how much cash I had on me. Some private investigator, huh? Well, I blame the night and the mixed company at Mix. So I fell back on that client confidentiality clause that was my trade. Remember, I'm a private, not public investigator.
Yeah, okay, Billy. If you need anything, you just ask me, okay?
Ain't no way I would involve him or his home in anything this serious. Mick was the kind of guy you couldn't tell this to, though, because he would only work harder to get into the thick of things. I had to give him an assurance I'd call on him, even if I knew I had no intention of doing so. I hear you, pal. Thanks. I gave Annabelle a wink, hopped off the bar stool, and straightened my hat. Good night, you crazy Pollock.
Sweet dreams, Scrappy.
Mick shot back with a wink. Yeah, I taught him that slur, and he's the only soul alive who is allowed to call me that. With the friendship we got, he earned it. The jingling of the bell was overpowered by the slam of the diner door closing behind me. I felt the slight March chill in the air as I looked around, savoring the sounds of Saturday night in Chicago. Car horns beeped. Traffic started to pick up slightly, and I caught the riff of a saxophone solo coming from a jazz club a few blocks away. Yeah, this was the Windy City, reveling in the apex of a weekend. My own weekend of rest and relaxation wouldn't start until I could close this case. I was past that point where you reconsider a charge into battle. Way past that moment when your battle axe is firm in your grasp and you're matching the grunts and growls of a front line of orcs and ogres with your own regiment's cry. Still, I caught myself wondering if it had been such a smart idea accepting this job. Dealing with Capone was bad enough, but what was so important in Chicago that Bugs Moran would risk getting into Capone's business close on the heels of Valentine's Day? A hit Moran knew full well was intended for him personally. Or was Moran just playing another one of his dangerous games with Capone? While Capone was a ruthless son of a bitch who left nothing to chance, Moran got this perverse joy in daring Capone through impromptu hits and other shows of disrespect, sometimes carried out on the same day a truce would be called between them. Capone just annoyed the hell out of me, but Moran gave me the willies. Moran. Capone. Apart from the obvious, could there be a connection that I wasn't seeing off the bat? The obvious connection was, of course, my client, Julia Lessinger, a spoiled little rich girl with a taste for the wilder side of Chicago, mixed up with one of Capone's most trusted generals. And because no doubt Pretty Boy had served as a mouthpiece for Capone in certain social settings, Julia could have associations with Moran. Could she have known about the hit on DeMaio before it went down? No, Lessinger wouldn't be that connected. She knew, like everyone in Chicago, that Capone was behind the hit. She wanted to know why the hit went down. I must admit, after my run-in with Moran's less-than-secret street spies, I now wanted to know why too. Whatever Capone's business was, it was grabbing the attention of the well-to-dos and the ne'er-do-wells alike. Feeling the rumbling of those 4 jalapenos in my gut, I decided it would be best to start fresh tomorrow. Tonight was going to be a quiet Saturday night of Pepto-Bismol and bed.